A lot of trade businesses use the same markup on every material item. 15% on the cable, 15% on the sockets, 15% on the fixings, 15% on the skip. It feels simple, but the exact same percentage can produce completely different results. Add 15% to a £500 item and you add £75. Add 15% to a 50p fixing and you add 7.5p. Same percentage, very different outcome. That is why one flat markup can leave some items covered and others quietly eating the margin. The better approach is what I call the markup ladder. You start with a sensible percentage for the type of item, then check the cash value, the quantity and the risk. The main rule is this: the cheaper the item, the higher the markup may need to be, unless quantity changes the result. The first level of the ladder is normal materials. These are the items you buy regularly, understand well and can source without much trouble. For an electrician, that might include cable, socket, standard fittings containing in common accessories. For many normal materials, 10 to 20% can be a sensible starting range. Around 15% may work well for plenty of day-to-day items, but it is only a starting point. The markup still needs to create enough cash to cover the work and risk behind supplying the item. The second level is small and pack-based items. Imagine a fixing costs 50p. Add 15% and the selling price becomes 57.5p. The markup is only 7.5p, but you still have bought a full pack. You also had to store it, find the right size and have it ready for the job. A high percentage may make more sense. At 100% markup, the 50p fixing sells for £1. At 200% it sells for £1.50. Those percentages don't sound large, but the cash value is still small. This is why cheaper items often need a higher percentage, but quantity completely changed the answer. A 200% markup on one fixing may be reasonable. Apply the same result to 100 identical fixings and the total may become expensive. So check two things: how many are being used and what cash value does the markup create across the quantity. If the job only uses a few items from a pack, a higher percentage may be justified. If it uses the whole pack or a large quantity, the percentage may need to come back down. That applies to screws, bolts, washers, cable ties, ferrules, grommets, lugs and similar items. The third level is specialist materials. A specialist item may have a higher value, but the bigger issue is often the work and the risk behind it. You may need to confirm part numbers, compatibility, lead times, return conditions or technical information. You may speak to the supplier several times before the item is ordered, and if it was wrong, it can delay the entire job. That extra work needs to be covered somewhere. You might use a higher markup, you might add a separate procurement allowance, or you might use a mixture of both. What matters is that you do not treat a specialist item like a normal stock when it already created extra work before reaching site. The fourth level is management costs. That includes skips, hire, delivery, waste removal, access equipment and specialist couriers. These are often treated as pass-through costs. A skip costs £250, so £250 goes into the quote, but somebody still has to arrange it, check the access, agree the date and deal with any collection problems. If the business arranged it, managed it, or carries the risk, the bare supply cost may not be enough. You can add a sensible markup, or you can include management time elsewhere, but the work involved needs to appear somewhere in the quote. The markup ladder is not a law. It is a better starting point than adding the same percentage to everything. Now, let's put it in a simple example. Imagine a quote includes a £500 specialist item and 10 fixings costing 50p each. A flat 15% markup adds £75 to the specialist item. That may be reasonable, but it may be too low if the item took hours to source and it carries a return risk. The same 15% adds only 75p across all 10 fixings. That is unlikely to cover the pack size, handling and stock behind the item. So the specialist item needs a risk and procurement check. The fixings may need a higher percentage and the quantity needs checking. So the final total still makes sense. Different items create different work, risk and cash values. They should not automatically receive the same percentage. There is another check that matters just as much. Do not count the same cost twice. If your labour rate already covers ordering, admin and management, you may not need to recover all that cost again through markup. If a procurement allowance is already in the quote, make sure the markup is not recovering the same time again. Ask where the cost is covered. It may sit in the labour rate, it may sit in overhead, it may sit in management time, or it may sit in the material markup. The important thing is that it appears once. If it appears nowhere, the business absorbs it. If it appears in several places, the quote may become difficult to justify. There are 3 mistakes I would avoid. The first is adding 15% to everything because it is easy. The second is applying a high small item percentage across a large quantity without checking the total. The third is using a markup to hide costs that should be shown separately, such as several hours of specialist procurement. After the job, compare the markup you allow with what actually happened. Check whether the normal items covered their handling. Look at whether small items or pack size aids the margin, and check how much time the specialist or managed items took to organise. That review is how the markup ladder improves, not by choosing a bigger percentage next time, by finding the type of item that was priced incorrectly. Before your next quote, review 4 material items from a completed job. Choose 1 normal item, 1 small or pack size item, 1 specialist item and 1 managed cost. Look at the cost, selling price, quantity and work involved. That will quickly show whether one flat markup is helping the business or hiding the problem. The difficult part is applying the logic consistently across every quote. That becomes even harder when more than one person starts pricing the work. That is where FieldHive can help. FieldHive is built around reusable catalogue items. You can store the base cost, markup and selling price instead of rebuilding the logic from memory. You can still adjust the result of the quantity, risk or the particular job. FieldHive does not decide the correct markup for you. You still use trade judgment. It gives the judgment a consistent starting point. So remember, the cheaper the item, the higher the markup may need to be, unless quantity changes the result. Use the markup ladder as a baseline. Check the cash value, check the quantity, and make sure specialist or managed items cover the work and the risk they create. Once labour and materials are priced properly, the next risk is what happens when the job changes. Customers add work, site conditions shift, items get missed, and unless those changes are quoted properly, the extra work gets absorbed. This is what we'll cover next: how to quote variations without losing money.